In the 1800s, Britain was a nation defined by power, ambition, and unyielding control. Across Europe, wars were fought to expand influence and secure trade. Britain rose above rival empires, France, Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands, using both skillful diplomacy and overwhelming military force. Victory at home fueled the desire to expand overseas. Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean became targets of ambition. British ships sailed along distant coasts, carrying both promises of trade and the threat of violence. They came as merchants and diplomats, but behind polite negotiations lay calculated plans for domination. In the colonies, women and men alike were subjected to strict control. Women who resisted societal norms or the demands of colonial authorities often found themselves imprisoned or confined. These women were made to serve households and colonial establishments, performing duties that were mandatory and exhausting. Their work included managing domestic chores, maintaining residences, and following orders from those in power, stripped of personal freedom. Meanwhile, men were forced into harsh labor. In Africa, captured individuals were marched to camps, forced to build roads, forts, and railways. Conditions were brutal: long hours, inadequate food, exposure to the elements, and little rest. The work was physically exhausting, yet it created the infrastructure that allowed the British Empire to expand and sustain itself. Resistance was met with harsh punishment. When traditional leaders and kings refused to collaborate, villages were surrounded, homes burned, and entire communities displaced. Those who resisted were imprisoned or forcibly relocated. This pattern repeated across continents. The empire tolerated no defiance. Within Britain itself, women faced strict societal and legal constraints. Those who challenged authority, whether in the family or in society, risked punishment in workhouses, prisons, or other institutions. Conditions were often harsh and degrading, emphasizing obedience over liberty. These women were compelled to contribute to households or estates in servitude-like conditions, performing daily chores under the watchful eyes of those in power. Across the empire, lavish lifestyles contrasted starkly with the suffering of those who built it. Royal residences, governors' halls, and the homes of the elite were adorned with luxury. Parties, dinners, and grand balls were common, symbols of wealth and status. While music and laughter filled the air, the lives of those who constructed these palaces, maintained the estates, and labored in the colonies remained a stark contrast, marked by fatigue, confinement, and strict obedience. Studio Microphone. If you're following this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. The history of these women and the empire deserves to be remembered. British leaders carefully planned every step of expansion. Maps were drawn, borders decided, and treaties designed to benefit the empire. When rulers resisted, the British used force. African men and women were captured and brought to camps where labor and service were demanded. Male laborers performed the hardest tasks under extreme conditions, building the very infrastructure that sustained British rule. Women's roles, both in the colonies and in Britain, were tightly controlled. Imprisoned or confined, they were made to serve in domestic settings, maintain households, and follow the strict rules of authority. They became symbols of the empire's control, showing how power could extend into private and domestic life. Some bore children while under confinement, carrying on life despite limited freedom. While these acts of control unfolded, Britain itself remained a powerful and developing nation. Industrialization, urban growth, and commerce flourished. The empire's wealth grew, funded by the labor and exploitation of both men and women across continents. British society celebrated its achievements with grand events, balls, and social gatherings, highlighting the stark divide between the elite and those who labored unseen. Across Africa and other colonies, resistance never ceased. Local leaders, kings, and chiefs attempted to maintain control over their lands and people. Battles were fought, both diplomatic and military. Villages were destroyed when opposition arose. But the determination of local populations persisted, laying the groundwork for future independence movements. By the early 1900s, the empire's power began to show cracks. Wars abroad drained resources, and the human cost of empire became increasingly apparent. Soldiers and laborers who returned from service saw a world beginning to question authority and injustice. Ideas about human rights and equality began to take root. Studio Microphone, remember to subscribe and like this video. These stories of resilience and endurance are vital to understand our shared history. Post-World War II, reform became unavoidable. By the 1950s, the world began recognizing the value of human rights. Policies were slowly implemented to improve the treatment of women, laborers, and oppressed populations. Colonies began to assert independence, demanding self-rule and respect. Leaders emerged across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, driven by the hope that freedom could finally be realized. The grandeur of British parties and palaces, once symbols of unchecked power, now served as reminders of how wealth was built on the labor and obedience of those denied freedom. The lavish halls where strategies were planned for wars, colonization, and exploitation stood in contrast to the daily lives of those who sustained the empire. Women, confined by both social norms and colonial control, gradually found voices in these new movements. They advocated for legal rights, equality, and justice, challenging centuries of confinement and oppression. Men who had endured forced labor and harsh treatment also joined the struggle for fair treatment, highlighting the shared sacrifices across continents. By the mid-20th century, the empire's reach was shrinking. Nations gained independence. Societies rebuilt. The lives of women and men who had been punished, confined, or forced into labor were remembered, and their endurance honored. Yet the lessons remained. Power without justice leads to suffering, and freedom must be fought for, nurtured, and protected. Studio Microphone. If you've learned something today, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this story. Let the world remember how women and men endured the empire's harsh rule. Today, historians look back on the 1800s and early 1900s with both awe and sorrow. Awe for the resilience of the people who survived, and sorrow for the lives constrained, punished, or lost under the British Empire. The story of women's punishment, the harsh labor of men, and the wealth built on control is an essential chapter in understanding history. The lavish parties, strategic residences, and halls of decision-making were built on the toil and obedience of many. While Britain prospered, countless lives were reshaped, confined, and directed by the empire's demands. And yet, through all this, human resilience never faltered. The history of punishment, control, and resistance reminds us that society's advancement comes with responsibility. It shows the importance of justice, equality, and the recognition of human dignity, lessons that resonate far beyond the 1800s. Empires may rise and fall, but the courage, endurance, and defiance of those oppressed remain a testament to humanity's strength. Studio Microphone. And finally, before we close, make sure to subscribe and like this video. Every view keeps these important stories alive and ensures the lessons of history are never forgotten.